Okay, so now let's look at the next question. Okay, so we have two parts here. We have to evaluate L once we're given the values of G and T. So that's part B, by the way. So in part A, what we want to do is to first of all make L the subject. But as we can see, we have what as a subject? We have T as a subject. So let me just do this right over here. So let's rewrite the formula. T equals 2 pi and then multiplied by the square root of L over G. Now notice that the square root of L over G is being multiplied by what? 2 pi, because this is actually 2 pi multiplied by, right? The way this is written, it can be a little confusing. It seems like 2 pi is actually the type of root, but no, this is actually 2 pi multiplied by square root of L over G. So to remove the 2 pi, we're going to need to do what? 2 pi is actually multiplying this quantity, the square root of L over G. So to get rid of it, we use division. So we're going to divide over here by 2 pi and divide over here as well by 2 pi. Now what this does, 2 pi cancels 2 pi, and so we have T over 2 pi equals the square root of what? L over G. Okay, so what do we do next? Can we cross multiply? No. Why is that? Because we have this side being square rooted. So we need to remove the square root, because notice that this quantity, L over G, is being square rooted. So we need to get rid of that square root, because the square root is affecting every other term. So to get rid of the square root, we're going to use square. So we're going to square both sides. Now we can't just put a square on T alone just like that. We have to square both sides. So what this does, it allows us to cancel off the square root with square. And so we have T over 2 pi all squared equals L over G. Now remember, the goal is to do what? Make L the subject. Okay, so what are we going to do? To make L the subject, we probably can simplify this or break out the brackets. So what we can say, well, look at this. T over 2 pi to be squared is actually T over 2 pi times T over 2 pi. Remember when you're squaring, what you do? You multiply the quantity by itself. And so we know T times T is actually what? T squared. And 2 pi times 2 pi is actually 4, since 2 is 4, and pi times pi is pi squared. Is there faster we could have done this? Well, we could distribute the square. So we could say T to be squared divided by, and 2 pi to be squared would be 4 pi squared, since it's 2 pi times 2 pi. Okay, now we want to make L the subject. So what are we going to do? Well, we could cross multiply, that's for one. Or we could say, well, we're going to transpose the G from the denominator to the numerator. And so we can simply put the G where T is on top of the numerator. And that's an easy way of doing it. But you might not be able to compute that in your mind right now, so let's do it the longer way. Let's consider the fact that we have two fractions equal, and we can cross multiply. So since what I want to find is L, I'm going to go with L first. So L times 4 pi squared is 4 pi squared L. What equal sign? And G times T squared is G T squared. Now, keep our eyes focused on the left-hand side. We're trying to make L the subject. So we ask the question, how is 4 pi squared connected to L? Of course, by multiplication. 4 pi squared is multiplying L. So to get rid of 4 pi squared, we'll need to divide by 4 pi squared. Remember what was said before is that because we're multiplying in the numerator, it allows us to cancel one of the factors in the numerator with that in the denominator, as long as they have a common factor. So the common factor we have is the highest one, which is 4 pi squared, right? Which can be divided into itself. So 4 pi squared itself goes once, 4 pi squared itself goes once, and we're left with L. And we cannot simplify the right-hand side, so we leave it as G T squared over 4 pi squared. Now someone may argue that we could have just left this and put the G next to it outside, but I think this is quite fine as a solution. Okay, now let's look at the next part. We want to evaluate. What are we trying to evaluate? We want to evaluate G. Well, we want to evaluate L actually, so my bad. We want to evaluate L. So evaluating L given the value of G, T, and pi. Okay, so since we want to evaluate L, we already have L as the subject over here, so we're going to just take that. L equals G T squared all over 4 pi squared. So in order for us to evaluate, what we need to do is to replace variables with values. Okay, or we can say constant with values too, right? Because pi is really a constant, and the constant they want us to take pi as is 22/7. So let's replace the G. G is actually 10, and T is to be taken as the same as R, which is 22/7. So we're going to put 22/7 in bracket, close bracket, and then we're going to put a square outside of the bracket. So this is G, which is 10, and T in the bracket with 22/7 squared. Then we're going to put 4. Then pi, we have to take pi as what? 22/7 as well, close bracket, and squared. All right. Not sure why we're taking T as same as pi, but that's what we're given and we work with it, right? And then we're going to simplify this. So let's do that. Well, obviously, since we have 22/7 to be squared, notice that we're multiplying that quantity, 10, by what? 22/7 to be squared. We're also multiplying 4. We're also multiplying 4 in the denominator by 22/7 to be squared. So since we're multiplying, so what we have on top is our 2 factors. On the bottom, we have 2 factors as well. The common factors in 22/7 to be squared can be cancelled out with itself once. And so we're left with what? 10/4. So we could have simplified here, but just let's continue. We're going to divide the denominator by 2, numerator by 2, since they have a common factor of 2. Let's leave us with 5/2. Now, 2 goes into 5 twice and remained once. In other words, 5 divided by 2 is actually 2.5. So L is equal to 2.5, or 2.5. And that is our solution. Let's look at the next question.